Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh. China has built the biggest navy in the world. Starting from 2015, China has embarked on what is being described as a shipbuilding spree unlike any other that's been witnessed in the history of the world. According to an assessment by the US Department of Defense, China has an estimated 350 major combat vessels and submarines. In comparison, the United States is said to have just about 250 combat vessels. But what has rung some serious alarm bells is the fact that the Chinese Navy isn't just getting bigger, it is even getting better. Consider this. According to the simulated conflicts conducted by the Pentagon in 2020, the United States would end up losing any war fought in the Pacific with China. This is an assessment that even General Mark Milley seems to agree with.
If you look at, again, 40 years ago, they had zero satellites. Look at what they've got today. They had no ICBMs. Look at what they've got today. They had no nuclear weapons. Look what they got today. They have no fourth or fifth generation fighters or even more advanced fighters back then. Look what they got today. They had no Navy. Look what they have today. They had no subforce. Look what they have today. So if you look at the totality, this test that occurred a couple weeks ago is only one of a much, much broader picture of a military capability with respect to the Chinese that is very, very significant. We're witnessing, in my view, we're witnessing one of the largest shifts in global geostrategic power.
China's naval power has undergone some very dramatic changes in the last 2 decades. According to the US Defense Department, China's Navy is an increasingly a modern and a flexible force that is focused on replacing previous generations of platforms with limited capabilities in favor of larger, modern, multi-role combatants. What this means is that the modern Chinese Navy has modern multi-role vessels that feature advanced anti-ship, anti-air and anti-submarine weapons and sensors. Now, China is spending vast amounts of resources in improving its naval power. China's growing fleet of aircraft carriers has garnered a lot of attention. As of today, China has got 2 combat-ready aircraft carriers, the Liaoning and the Shandong. A 3rd aircraft carrier, Fujian, is presently also being fitted out. It will be a Type 3 carrier with a displacement of 85,000 tons. Although impressive, it will still be less than the 100,000-ton super carriers of the United States. By 2030, China is expected to possess a minimum of 6 aircraft carriers, fitted with advanced features like an electromagnetic launch system. A carrier fleet can also provide air cover for an amphibious invasion of Taiwan, and it can also confront the US Navy in the very first carrier versus carrier battles since the end of the Second World War. By 2025, China is expected to field as many as about 400 combat vessels, while the US Navy's goal is to have just about 355 combat vessels with no fixed date to reach this target. But the number game can sometimes be pretty misleading. The US Navy still deploys more tonnage in the high seas. It has bigger and heavier armed ships like guided missile destroyers and cruisers. For every 1,000 tons of displacement, an aircraft carrier can carry a fighter jet on its deck. The heavier American ships mean that the United States still has a better advantage in dominating the skies over the blue seas. Besides this, the United States has more than 9,000 vertical launch missile cells on its surface ships, while China at this point of time has only about 1,000 vertical launch missile cells. The US attack submarine fleet of 53 submarines is entirely nuclear powered, while just about 7 of China's attack submarines are said to be nuclear powered, giving the United States a significant edge in terms of range and endurance. What is also giving a lot of sleepless nights to the strategists at the Pentagon is the furious pace with which China is constructing its warships. Consider this: in 2019, China built more ships in 1 year of peacetime than the United States did in the 4 years of war between the years 1941 till 45 at the height of the Second World War. The biggest military drills that were conducted by China during the fourth Taiwan Strait crisis were a statement of intent. Beijing has made it clear that if it wants to, then it can blockade Taiwan at a moment of its choosing. With every passing year, China is shifting the balance of power on the high seas. It is no longer content sitting tight in the South China Sea region, but building artificial islands, militarizing them, and expanding its footprint. Beijing's forays into the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean region highlight the Chinese ambitions. The 26th President of the United States of America, Theodore Roosevelt, believed that a good navy is not a provocation to war. It is the surest guarantor of peace. But in the case of China, the world's biggest navy has been built with the intent of displacing the other navies from the Pacific and the Indian Ocean region. And this means an impending naval conflict. The Iranian nuclear deal is surely diplomacy's most explosive hot potato. 16 months of intense indirect negotiations between the United States and Iran, mediated by the European Union, now hinge on one crucial factor: Israel. The fact is, Tel Aviv has been dead opposed to the 2015 nuclear deal being revived. And now, the chief of Mossad, the Israeli spy agency David Barnea, has visited Washington to lobby against this breakthrough deal. But the question, of course, is how far is Israel willing to go to ensure that the West and Iran don't end up shaking hands to revive the nuclear deal?
Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid stood in front of an F-35 fighter with a message.
עדיין מוקדם מדי לדעת אם אכן הצלחנו לבלום את הסכם הגרעין, אבל ישראל ערוכה לכל איום ולכל תרחיש. אם איראן תמשיך לנסות, היא תגלה את ידה הארוכה ואת יכולותיה של ישראל, נמשיך לפעול בכל הגזרות נגד הטרור, נגד מבקשי רעתנו. כפי שסוכם ביני לבין הנשיא ביידן, יש לנו חופש פעולה מלא לעשות כל מה שנמצא לנכון כדי למנוע את האפשרות שאיראן תהפוך לאיום גרעיני.
Tel Aviv's intention is clear: to stop Tehran from acquiring nuclear capabilities. And to do this, Israel has said it will use every option on the table. Just last month, there were reports that Israeli F-35 fighter jets had repeatedly entered into Iranian airspace, without the Iranian or Russian radar systems picking them up for a challenge. So will Israel resort to airstrikes to derail Tehran's nuclear program? To prove its point, the Israeli Air Force has shared this tweet. The incident dates back exactly 15 years. On the 5th of September in 2007, the Israeli F-15 and F-16 fighter jets swooped down in the dead of the night on Syria's Deir ez-Zor and bombed a cube-like structure that was tucked away in a desert valley. The operation was called Out of the Box, or Operation Orchard, and according to reports, the Israeli airstrike destroyed a nuclear reactor that was just months away from completion. 41 years ago, on the 7th of June in 1981, Israeli fighter jets bombed an unfinished Iraqi nuclear reactor, 17 kilometers outside of the Iraqi capital. Codenamed variously as Operation Babylon or Operation Opera. This Israeli attack came about a year after Iran had partially destroyed the Iraqi Osiris-class nuclear reactor in 1980. In a strike called Operation Scorching Sword to prevent Saddam Hussein from acquiring nuclear weapons. Operation Opera also established the Begin Doctrine, named after Menachem Begin, the founder of the Likud party, and the 6th Prime Minister of Israel. The Begin Doctrine explicitly states strikes on nuclear facilities are not an anomaly, but a precedent for every future government in Israel. So the doctrine for a unilateral strike already exists in Tel Aviv. In the past, Israel has relied on other means to hobble the Iranian nuclear program. In 2010, Israel deployed the Stuxnet malware to destroy hundreds of centrifuges at the Natanz nuclear facility. In 2012, Iran complained of another malware called Flame that was used to infect computers at Iran's nuclear facilities. In 2018, mysterious explosions at the Natanz nuclear facility caused extensive damage to centrifuges at Natanz. And there have been a string of high-profile assassinations of Iran's nuclear scientists, like that of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh in November 2020, that have been carried out by Israel's Mossad. Yair Lapid contends that reviving the nuclear deal and lifting the crippling financial sanctions will present Iran with $100 billion a year to destabilize the whole of Middle East. But, unlike in the case of Syria and Iraq in the past, an airstrike on Iran's nuclear facilities won't be a cakewalk. To begin with, there are 6 nuclear facilities in Iran, and at Natanz and Fordo. Centrifuges have been moved deep under the ground in a complex maze of tunnels. And secondly, there are challenges of distance, airspace, accessibility, and air defenses. Israel's lobbying at Washington has given the Biden administration a lot of doubt to chew upon. Even if the idea that a nuclear deal with Iran is better than no deal with Iran were to prevail at the White House, Israel's track record shows that it is not averse to plunging headfirst into dangerous missions, even in the teeth of international disapproval.
The role played by mercenaries in the war in Ukraine is not to be underestimated. It is not possible to independently verify how many mercenary soldiers have been fielded by either side. But the fact remains that with the casualty count mounting and with either side finding it hard to recruit new soldiers, more and more mercenaries are being roped in. In this video posted by the Russian Defense Ministry, Moscow has claimed that it has managed to capture the settlement of Blahodatne, 52 kilometers east of Mykolaiv. Blahodatne is strategically important, and its capture by the Russian forces opens the approach towards the port city of Mykolaiv. In the city of Kharkiv, a Russian rocket attack destroyed an apartment building in the central part of the city, resulting in widespread damage. According to reports, at least about 2 people were killed and several others are said to be injured. In Bakhmut, 3 people were killed and 4 others were wounded after Russian shells devastated a civilian neighborhood. Anthony Blinken, who visited Kiev this week, walked through the ruins of some destroyed buildings in Irpin.
Look at all of these buildings, all civilian dwellings, and at best it seems indiscriminate, at worst intentional.
To help the Ukrainian war effort, the United States is now pitched in with another $675 million of military aid.
The war is at another key moment. Russian forces continue to cruelly bombard Ukrainian cities and civilians with missiles and artillery fire. But Ukrainian forces have begun their counteroffensive in the south of their country. And they are integrating the capabilities that we all have provided to help themselves to fight and reclaim their sovereign territory.
Washington has so far provided more than $10 billion in terms of military assistance to Ukraine. And according to American claims, at least about 400 Russian targets have been hit with the US-supplied HIMARS rocket systems with devastating consequences. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry has posted this video claiming that it has managed to blow up the Russian S-300 missile systems in Balaklia in the Kharkiv region. The Ukrainians claim that Russia has relied on brute force to to make progress on the battlefield. For its part, Kiev has relied on tactics and smart weapons to change the facts on the ground. This grainy video shows a Ukrainian deployed Bayraktar drone blowing up a Russian target. On the back of these military gains, President Volodymyr Zelensky has claimed that Ukraine has managed to reconquer almost about 1,000 square kilometers of territory in the east and the southern part of Ukraine in just the last 7 days.
During the course of defensive operations, which are still underway, our heroes have liberated dozens of settlements. And today this tendency continues and there are new results. In total, since September 1, more than 1,000 square kilometers of our territory were liberated. Thanks to all who ensured it. Thanks to the army, intelligence officers, special forces officers for every Ukrainian flag which was raised these days.
If these gains are confirmed and held by the Ukrainian forces, then this would be a serious blow for Russia, which the Western intelligence services claim has suffered some big reverses. It would also represent a big boost for Ukraine, which is keen to show its Western backers that it can change the facts on the ground by force, and therefore it deserves its continued support. But Russia has tried to largely portray an image that it is unperplexed by the Ukrainian gains on the battlefield. Instead, it has claimed to have destroyed the US-made HIMARS rocket systems and also the other weapon systems supplied to Kiev by Washington.
In
the area around the settlement of Chervony, Donetsk, Kharkiv region, a US-made HIMARS multiple-launch rocket launcher was destroyed. An American M777 howitzer was destroyed in the Rivnopilya area of the Zaporizhzhia region.
The Western strategy to starve Russia of its funds by imposing crippling financial sanctions has paid few dividends. More than 6 months into this war, it is still impossible to predict as to how any of this will end. But with the United States pumping in more weapons and more money into the battlefield, the proxy war appears that it will drag on for a long time to come. In the last 7 years, Burkina Faso in the Sahel region of Africa has been in the grip of deadly Islamist violence. In the latest incident, a blast at a supply convoy has resulted in the deaths of over 35 people and dozens of others, including many children, getting injured. The military that staged a coup in the month of January earlier this year claims that it has intensified its operations against the Islamist insurgents. But despite that, there have been a string of terror attacks that have claimed hundreds of lives just this year and have also forced thousands of other people to flee from their homes. So why has Burkina Faso failed in stamping out the deadly Islamist violence?
This is a scene that has now become all too familiar. Government officials visiting hospitals to offer compensation and hope to the wounded.
We found that the medical teams have been working hard since the tragedy occurred, and in collaboration with the teams of the Ministry of Humanitarian Action. I would like to salute the bravery, serenity and responsiveness with which these teams took charge of the wounded. I would therefore like to encourage them to continue along this path.
The attack took place on the night of the 7th of September. An improvised explosive device was used to target a supply convoy that was transiting from Djibo to Burzanga. Groups linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State have fanned out across the northern and eastern part of Burkina Faso. They've struck both government and civilian positions at will. The military junta that toppled the government in January 2022 and promised to crush the terror outfits has so far failed to deliver.
I ask our nation to trust the defense and security forces and the government and not to give in to the psychosis that armed terrorist groups are trying to develop to destabilize our country. The signs of the strategic shift are already perceptible. We remain confident in our strength and in our ability to defeat this peril.
According to estimates, just 60% of Burkina Faso's territory is directly administered by the government, while groups affiliated to the Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State and other non-state militia control the other 40%. 86 people were killed in the month of June when armed gangs of men went from house to house in the village of Setenga, picking off individuals they could lay their hands on. Those who managed to survive decided to flee from their village despite assurances from the security establishment.
It's so serious. It's very serious. We can't even explain it. I can't even express myself. Everyone is scared. In Setenga, there is no one left. They stripped the house. They searched everything. There are no children or adults. They killed everyone. They don't ask if you're a child or an adult. Even if you close the house, they did everything to open the door and kill the children and the men.
Even army barracks have come under attack. In the month of May, 5 soldiers of Burkina Faso were killed in a jihadist attack. In the last 7 years, an estimated 2 million people have fled the country.
North Korea, which tested its first nuclear bomb in October 2006, has now passed a new law, by which Pyongyang has given itself the right to resort to a preemptive nuclear strike to protect itself. With this, the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has said that North Korea's nuclear status is irreversible, and the possibility of talks for the denuclearization of North Korea have been barred. Military units from 15 nations, including Russia, China, and India, among others, took part at the Vostok 2022 military drills. 5,000 pieces of weaponry, including 140 aircrafts and 60 naval ships, took part in the drills. Russian President Vladimir Putin was personally present to see the strategic joint military drills in Russia's Far East. Israel resorted to carrying out bombings on Syria's Aleppo International Airport for the second time in a span of less than a week. The Syrian Foreign Ministry described the air attack on the civilian airport as a war crime that damaged the runway and took it out of service. In the past, Israel has resorted to repeatedly carrying out airstrikes on different targets within Syria. Very few of these airstrikes by Israel are officially acknowledged by Tel Aviv. Tensions are on the rise as Turkey has accused Greece of occupying the demilitarized islands of the Aegean Sea. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has threatened that Ankara is prepared to do what is necessary when the time comes. Although the two neighboring nations are members of the NATO military alliance, their relationship has been marred by strident rhetoric over their maritime boundaries and the hydrocarbon resources of the Mediterranean.
At the conclusion of this episode, I want to leave you with something to think about. On the 5th of September, Canada witnessed what has been described as one of the deadliest mass killings in Canadian history. Two brothers, Damien Sanderson and Miles Sanderson, went on a stabbing spree, killing 10 people and wounding 15 others. The stabbings in fact took place at 13 different crime scenes in the Canadian province of Saskatchewan. Eventually, the police found the body of Damien Sanderson and later succeeded in arresting his brother as well, who died in custody of what the police has described as self-inflicted injuries. A statement by the indigenous leaders indicated that the attacks may have been drug-related. Now, many of you over the course of the last several weeks have written to me stating that in this show World at War, we highlight about wars, conflicts and violence, but we don't offer any solutions. Because the fact is, conflicts and acts of violence that we cover are often very complex. It is not easy to offer ready-made solutions to these intractable conflicts and acts of violence. But my intention is to make you sit up and think. Thanks for watching World at War. And if you want to reach out to me with any suggestions or comments or feedback, please feel free to tweet to me on the Twitter handle that you see on your screens. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh. Thanks for watching.